everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Kavanaugh's Corner. This is part 4 of 8. We're midway there. My look at MacGyver here, the original series. Today I'm going to be looking at the 4th season of the show. This is the season where things kind of started to take a turn for the worse on the show. The writing really begins to falter at this point. The writing takes like a major downturn this season. There are a few episodes here and there that are more like in the vein of MacGyver when the show first started, like the first 2 seasons. But now the show starts to become more about what MacGyver is doing and less about the character himself. However, as strange as that is, there is also one episode in this season that kind of gives a very massive backstory to MacGyver himself. So there's like a introspective episode, but the rest of the season is kind of a letdown. It's kind of depressing. There are more really cringe-worthy episodes this season. There are 2 that are almost unwatchable, and when you come upon them, you'll know what I'm talking about. There's one called Cleo Rocks, which is really like one of these Say No to Drugs episodes with a very, very cheesy, awful kind of soundtrack. And it is really poorly done. It is just one of these really strange episodes. There is one episode, though, I do want to take a second to talk about, and that is an episode called Blood Brothers. And this episode, which probably should have been the opener of the season, instead becomes an episode, I think it's the 2nd episode, but it becomes in my mind like one of the most memorable episodes of the entire show. This episode explains why MacGyver does not like to use guns. It is a current day story that MacGyver is involved in that also kind of keeps flashing back to MacGyver when he was a kid. And it's a really interesting way to tell the story about this kid that's faced with a pretty serious choice and a situation that MacGyver was involved in when he was a kid. So it's nice to see that. It's nice to see something like that come about, because you really do learn a lot about MacGyver and why he is the way he is. And then there's the later parts of the season where MacGyver starts to become like a social worker. And it's a little weird. I mean, MacGyver worked with kids in season 2 and 3 here and there, but this one here, it really becomes kind of a regular thing. MacGyver starts to work at a YMCA in this season. And again, I don't know who thought this was a good idea, but for whatever reason, MacGyver, like I said, becomes a social worker now. And he went from being like a secret agent to like this like badass kind of like on his own kind of like, you know, a troubleshooter for hire, to being like a guy that works at the YMCA. And why they did that on this show, I'll never understand why they took it in that direction, but it really did change the way the show went from here on out. There was an episode in the season called The Challenge, which starts from the Challengers Club that used to exist at the YMCA. It might still exist to this day. I don't know. It probably does. I haven't been to a YMCA in quite a long time. But it is a shockingly violent episode that deals with kind of like gang violence and shootings, and it's a really deadly serious episode. It's not a bad episode by any means. It's a very, very sad episode of the show. And it is one of these episodes. I remember watching it when I first saw it like years ago, and I cried a little bit. I gotta be honest, it is a deadly, deadly serious episode. It's very well done, but I have to say, it's one of these episodes that stays with you for a while. And as bad as it is, I was very shocked at how brutally violent this episode was in comparison to the entirety of the rest of the show. And there are other episodes later on the line that deal with gangs again, but this is probably the most realistic it ever got. And I'm glad they did it because it was a very big thing in the late 80s, early 90s, and this season kind of took place right before the 90s began, so it's nice to see that. Mac's hair in this season does get a little bit longer, so the mullet is kind of in full swing in this season. This is kind of where that started happening. Thankfully this season, the good episodes outweigh the bad. There are, like I said, there are a few really cringe-worthy episodes in this season, but there are also a few that are very touching, and you do learn a little bit more about MacGyver than one would have expected at this point. Normally, by the 4th season of the show, characters kind of become stagnant. Thankfully, they were able to develop MacGyver a little bit more in this season, and it really does help out the show as a whole. I give this season a 3 out of 5. I think it's still a very good show at this point. I just wish the Canada setting wasn't there because there are more episodes in this season with rain than probably any other show I've ever seen in my life. So, still worth watching. I like the 4th season. Next time we're going to be talking about Season 5 of MacGyver, which this is kind of where the show really goes off the deep end. So I'm very excited to talk to you about that. And we'll see you next time on Kavanaugh's Corner. Thank you. Good night.